about the delay in the waiting area. For all of you who had to wait instead of sitting up here. So. You ready?
Just give me a second here.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. I've called this press conference in regards to my office's review of the cases involving Damacio Diaz and Patrick Mara. The review on Damacio Diaz covered cases he was involved in from 2011 to 2014. And for Mr. Mara, the review was conducted on cases he was involved in from 2010 to 2014. We based our review on when they were involved in their criminal conduct up until the point they were placed on administrative leave sometime in early 2015, pending a federal investigation. This time frame, the 2010 to 2014 time frame, includes a period when Diaz and Mara were assigned to the Southern Tri-County Task Force of the Central Valley High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area, which is known as HIDTA. The federal investigation and federal prosecution disclosed that Diaz and Mara would steal their drugs in their capacity as police officers and then sell the drugs for profit. Diaz was recently sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, and Mara awaits sentencing on Monday, October 17th. In our review of these cases during this time frame, we looked at cases with either or both, meaning Diaz and Mara, did any work on a case beyond merely being present. For example, if either one of them took statements, seized evidence, or wrote reports, we will be sending letters to defense attorneys or defendants who represented themselves. These letters will notify the defense attorneys or the pro per defendants about the criminal conduct of Diaz and Mara, which would have impacted Diaz's and Mara's credibility in that particular case. And the letters will also notify the attorneys about the role Diaz and Mara had in the investigation of the case. As far as Damacio Diaz, we reviewed a total of 32 cases involving 53 defendants. Out of those, 8 cases involved misdemeanor charges, 24 cases involved felony charges. Out of those 32 cases, we will be sending letters to defense attorneys or pro per defendants in 20 cases. In 2 of the misdemeanor cases that arose in 2011 and in one in 2012, those cases were misdemeanor prostitution cases, and those cases will be dismissed, as Detective Diaz was the only individual who was involved in an undercover capacity, and there was no cooperation other than what he had written in his report. For the most part, the cases involving Diaz that we reviewed involved primarily drug charges, but there was also a robbery charge, prostitution, as I've mentioned, an assault with a deadly weapon charge, and 1 attempted murder case. We undertook the same analysis for Mara. Between 2010 and 2014, Mara wrote reports, interviewed witnesses, and seized evidence in 55 cases. 33 cases were felonies, 22 were misdemeanors. Those 55 cases involved 70 defendants. Of those 55 cases, we will be sending letters to defense attorneys or defendants who represented themselves in 44 cases. The charges in the cases in which Mara was involved primarily involved narcotics cases. However, defense attorneys will be notified on 5 child molest cases, 2 felony child abuse cases, a vehicle theft case, and a few other charges in some of the misdemeanor cases. We will be litigating any cases in which motions for new trials or motions to withdraw pleas are filed on behalf of these defendants who received the letters. I would like to conclude my remarks by saying that the disgraceful and criminal behavior of Diaz and Mara has gravely impacted the Bakersfield Police Department and the people in our community. They have brought dishonor to their badge and to our community as a whole. that they were sworn to serve and protect. I'll take any questions at this time.
So why did you want to send these letters out? What do you think this will help accomplish?
Well, it's our ethical obligation, although we don't have a criminal integrity unit or a conviction review unit. We felt that it was important for the purposes of transparency as well as our ethical obligation to review all of these cases and inform defendants and defense attorneys that these particular individuals were involved in their case.
How did you determine if you were going to send out the letter or not in those cases?
We received information from basically the investigating agencies in this case as to the cases that they were involved in those time frames. And then we just looked at their role, but essentially we decided to send letters in every case where they had any active role other than if they were just present and didn't write a report and didn't do anything else. On those particular cases, we decided that there was no need to send letters.
So do we have an idea yet how many new trials may have to happen or new steps?
Well, we're sent 87 cases that we reviewed, both of those individuals that they were involved in. We're sending a total of 64 letters, so it could be as many as 64 cases that we will have to respond, oppose motions to withdraw pleas. A handful of cases were actually jury trials, where there'll be a motion to withdraw a plea that resulted in, a motion for a new trial in a case which resulted in a guilty verdict. So there's a lot more work to be done. This is really the first step, but this is the step that we needed to do in terms of the impact on criminal cases, apart from what the federal investigation covered.
So that redoing of things, if I can use that term, only happens if the attorneys or the people defending themselves request that, or
that's right.
You are not restarting anything on your own.
We're informing them that Diaz and or Mara were involved, and we're pointing out in a broad way what their involvement was. So if they choose to act upon that, certainly they can. They had the information to do that if they choose to do so.
So how much of a disruption to the local judicial process are we seeing here?
Well, honestly, this has been a huge disruption. If you think about all the prosecutorial resources that were spent on litigating these cases in the first place, from attorneys in my office, the defense attorneys, the judges, then at least 100 hours have been spent on the review of these cases. We did not take this review lightly. We did not enter into it lightly. And then consider having to draft the letters, send out the letters, and then relitigate these issues. All this for an office, my office, which has been given less prosecutorial resources this year than in any other year in the past 5 years. So this is an extreme burden on my office, but it's one, as I said, ethically we have to undertake. It's absolutely the right thing to do.
So could they ask for something to happen over again, say a new trial, and something to be reviewed, and you just decide not to retry a case, or what are the possible outcomes of this situation?
So they could let's take a case where a defendant pled guilty, and either Mara or Diaz were a crucial witness in one of those cases. So if so it'd be a motion that would be filed. We would file a pleading as well, and the judge would make a decision. If the judge allowed that defendant to withdraw his plea, we would assess at that time what is the evidence, what is the additional evidence that we have that would allow us to move forward, excluding, of course, any participation in the case by Mr. Diaz or Mr. Mara.
So it's considered anything they contributed is at this point, I won't use the right word, tainted, that you couldn't use it if you needed to relitigate something?
I think tainted is an excellent word, and yes.
There have been a few murder cases that have not been solved yet. Matthew Odom and the Heinze case that Diaz was involved in, but they're not solved yet. How does that affect cases that no one's been arrested and his involvement in them?
I'm unaware of Diaz's involvement in the Heinze case. I can speak to the Odom case and just really only tell you, since that is not a filed case and it is actively being investigated by the Bakersfield Police Department, they would probably be in the best position to respond to that question. Usually they work in teams in terms of homicide investigations, so hopefully that was the case.
If someone is arrested, would it affect prosecuting them, the trial, having him being a part of it?
I think at this point, since both law enforcement and the DA's office are aware of the situation involving Diaz, that we would evaluate the case for filing. Can we prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt without Diaz's testimony? So I think that moving forward actually will not be an issue on cases that haven't been submitted to us.
Would it be less likely that you would submit a case if he was involved?
It really depends what the other cooperation would be. Are there other offices? Did the defendant confess to the crime? There's so many possibilities. It's really hard to know.
How much would be the cost of retrying all these people to the county?
I don't have a number for you, but I could only speculate. But in the cost in man hours, as I said, I think just on the review that we've undergone over the course of the last, I believe it's been last 4 to 8 weeks, I'd say well over 100 hours have been put in by my staff to review these cases, to discuss them, to reach conclusions that I'm presenting to all of you here today.
When we spoke to you earlier after the Diaz sentencing, you said some of them were very high-profile cases that are being impacted. Is there anything more you want to say about that today?
I can just give you an example of probably what I was referring to back then. Just give me a moment. There's one case that you may recall. I don't know if it was high profile, but it was media interest. And it was the case of the Bakersfield police officer, Ofelio Lopez Jr. That was back in 2011, and basically then Officer Lopez retrieved a purse and found methamphetamine in the purse, and he didn't book the purse into property. And later that day, it was Diaz who found the purse in the defendant's trunk and noticed that there was one bindle missing. So in that case, that's an example of one of the cases that we'll be sending a letter to Mr. Lopez's attorney at the time and notify him of Diaz's involvement in the case. Since that time, actually, Lopez's case was reduced to a misdemeanor, and it's now been dismissed through the court process. But we will still be notifying him if there was a felony conviction, and that's an example of probably one of the cases that I was referencing.
Public Defender Conrad Moore has suggested that his office doesn't have the resources or time to deal with these sorts of cases. Do you know the number or approximate number of the cases of the total that are involving in the Public Defender's office?
I didn't count that, but if I had to pick a number off the top of my head, I would say approximately 2/3.
Okay.
2/3 of those 68. I think.
It sounds to me that you're really erring on the side of let's do this right. Let's get all the information out there. And in talking to when I did the story earlier a few months ago, I talked to UC Irvine professor Erwin Chemerinsky, who said that in the Rampart scandal at LAPD, they brought in an independent investigating agency to look at these cases. Did you consider that, or did it just seem not necessary in this situation?
We didn't consider it. I was and I am extremely confident that the review that my staff conducted was thorough, impartial, and very fair to the defendants who were involved in these cases.
Do you know how many of those cases both of them crossed over and they were both involved in?
I don't. I don't have that figure off the top of my head. There were a few, though.
And after all your investigation, have you found any systemic problem in the BPD?
No. Not in what we looked at. Unfortunately, it appears in our review that Diaz and Mara were essentially rogue officers, and we're out doing these things unbeknownst to the Bakersfield Police Department.
If you're sending out these letters, the recipients, do they have a certain period of time within which they have to respond?
I don't think we actually hadn't addressed that question, but I would say no. I mean, you know, nothing in government works very quickly. That's my experience. But you know, I think a reasonable time. I'm not sure if we got a letter 5 years down the line. But some of these individuals are incarcerated. They are in custody. So I imagine for them, you know, it'll be sooner than later type of thing.
In Diaz's sentencing documents, he alludes that there's other officers involved but didn't name any names. Will you make him name names?
I don't have any access to Diaz in terms of what he's done. It's my understanding that if there were other officers involved, that none of their behavior amounts to criminal behavior, which would typically be when my office would be involved.
Do you think that his sentence was fair?
No, I think it was extremely lenient.
And why was he and Mara prosecuted on a federal level?
You know, I don't have an answer for that. They never came to you know, the district attorney's office to even look at this, and quite honestly, we probably don't have the resources in our Bureau of Investigation to undertake such a wide-ranging investigation. So I think that it was appropriate that that the U.S. attorney and they could marshal the resources of the federal government to do a very wide-ranging and thorough investigation.
What do you think a fair sentence would have been?
I think that given what Diaz did and over the course of time that he did those things, and given the position of trust that he had in the community, that something in the neighborhood of, I think he was looking at 15 to 20, was that what the plea bargain was for? I think something in that neighborhood would have been appropriate for these incidents that just basically cast such a shadow over really good and hardworking law enforcement in this county and in this city.
Were you surprised when you heard that it was 7?
No.
Or 5?
5.
5.
No, nothing. Nothing that judges do surprises me.
Is there a precedent for this many cases having to be looked at again in this county?
Are you asking, have we done this before?
Sorry, yes.
You know, I'm trying to think. We have. Gosh, I'm trying to think if we have. We have done some things involving the lab, where we've sent out letters regarding drug testing and notified defense attorneys. I mean, it is our obligation to do this, but nothing of this, you know, scope. I can definitely tell you that.
So what happens next?
We'll work on sending the letters out next week. We've identified the attorneys, and then we'll wait to hear who responds and who wants a hearing, and try to figure out which personnel in the office will be handling what cases. We don't have a designated person to handle all these cases moving forward.
And so it's a total of 64 letters between the two.
Correct.
Do you have a timeline as to how long do you expect people to start responding to your letters?
I would expect that if they receive the letters, let's say, if not next week, in the early part of the week after that, if the defendant/client is in custody, that we will hear something from the defense attorney in terms of some type of court pleading very, very soon. I would speculate within the next 4 to 6 weeks.
What if someone didn't get a letter but they feel that one of them was involved in their case? Is there anything that they can do?
Yes, they can. If they feel that there was some involvement by Mara or Diaz, they can contact in our Bureau of Investigations, the chief, and then that information can be passed on to someone in the criminal division, one of the attorneys who will take a look at that.
So that's the investigation bureau chief within the DA's office?
That's right.
And much was made about budget cuts coming around this time. Obviously, having to have something like this kind of on your plate now, what are your
Well, and we have a job to do, especially when it comes to something like this. But if you're asking me, would I love to have a conviction review unit, conviction integrity unit, to have a dedicated prosecutor doing that? I think we'd have enough work for that person. So I'd love to get funding in next year's budget from the Board of Supervisors. I think that it's absolutely essential. We do have an investigator funded by the board who does those type of reviews or actually investigations when it's maybe a public integrity type investigation. But to be able to pair that position with a prosecutor would be great. Yeah, I would really like to have another body to do that. Okay, thank you, everybody. Appreciate your coming. And that will conclude the press conference.
Thank you.
You're welcome.